All righty, let's get going. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Lisa Plagemeyer, the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. I'm really glad that you could join us today for this kickoff of Data Privacy Week 2026. Whether you're joining us as an individual trying to make sense of your digital life, a small business owner, an educator, or someone working at a large organization, thank you for being here. Your time and attention here today tell us something important, that privacy matters to you, and that you recognize it's something we all have to actively work at. We can't just assume it. The National Cybersecurity Alliance is a nonprofit on a mission to create a more secure, interconnected world. For more than 2 decades, we've focused on helping people understand cybersecurity and privacy in practical, accessible, and human ways. We co-lead Cybersecurity Awareness Month every October and Data Privacy Week every January. We build free resources and toolkits and run public education campaigns designed to meet people where they are, not where we wish they were. At the NCA, we believe security and privacy are not just technical issues, they're people issues. They're about trust, confidence, and the ability to participate fully in modern life. That brings us to Data Privacy Week. Data Privacy Week is an international effort held every January to raise awareness of the importance of respecting privacy, safeguarding data, and enabling trust. It's about empowering individuals to take control of their personal information while also encouraging organizations to be transparent, responsible, and ethical in how they collect, use, and protect our data. And in 2026, that mission feels more urgent than ever. Every day, we generate enormous amounts of data, often without giving it a second thought. Our locations, our habits, our conversations, our faces, our voices. This situation creates risk when data is collected carelessly, stored indefinitely, or used in ways people never expected or agreed to. Privacy is no longer just about secrecy, it's about agency. It's about knowing what data is being collected, why it's being collected, and what choices you have. Data Privacy Week is a time to celebrate dignity, fairness, and safety. We also know that privacy can feel completely overwhelming. Policies are long, settings are confusing. Technologies evolve faster than laws and norms. One of the biggest challenges we see is people feeling resigned, as if the loss of privacy is inevitable and there's nothing they can do about it. At the NCA, we reject that idea. While it may not be realistic to leave no trace online, it is possible to better manage the trace that we leave. Small, informed decisions by individuals and organizations add up, and education is the first step toward these decisions. That's what this week and this webinar are all about. Over the course of Data Privacy Week, we'll be talking about practical actions people can take, emerging risks like AI-driven data misuse, and the shared responsibility we all have, businesses, governments, and individuals alike, to build a more trustworthy digital ecosystem. Today's session is designed to set the tone for that conversation. We want you to walk away feeling informed, not intimidated, curious, not helpless, more confident in your ability to ask good questions about your data and demand better practices from the systems and organizations you interact with. So again, thank you for being here and for starting Data Privacy Week 2026 with us. Your participation matters, not just this week, but all year long. Now I'd like to welcome Udpav Tiwari, VP for Strategy and Global Affairs at Signal, for a fireside chat. If you can turn on your camera. And again, if you have questions, please put those in the Q&A. If Rodolfo, you can turn your camera off till we get to the panel. If you have your hand raised, please put your question, if it's a question, in the Q&A. If it's a comment, go ahead and throw it in the chat. We might have some time at the end if you want to come off mute, but we'll see. Udpav, thank you very much for being with us today. I think most people know what Signal is, hopefully. Do you want to give a short introduction real quick?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. Hi, I'm Udpav Tiwari, Signal's VP for Strategy and Global Affairs, where I broadly lead Signal's work on external engagement. So part comms, part marketing, part policy. And it's mostly about showing up in the world, listening to how Signal is being used around the world, and also shaping what are the things in the outside world that Signal should bring internally to help evolve and grow its product. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being here. So Data Privacy Week is all about raising awareness and empowering people to take control of their data. But the way we experience privacy is changing. It's evolving very quickly. AI isn't just about answering questions for us anymore. It's starting to actually perform tasks and in some cases act on our behalf. So before we dive in, for people that maybe aren't following the rapid developments in AI, can you give us some background, maybe a little bit of a definition about what agentic AI actually is and how it differs from other forms of AI?
Absolutely. So the way that we all really have understood AI historically in the history of technology and in the past approximately 3 to 4 years has obviously radically evolved, right? AI is fundamentally a marketing term. It's a marketing term used to create technologies such as machine learning and deep learning and many other technologies and give them a framework so that we can understand them as technologies that make probabilistic decisions, unlike traditional software, which is often, certain. If this happens, then this will happen. Artificial intelligence software has the ability to choose what it thinks probably should happen or help make decisions from very wide, astonishingly large data sets in order to derive insights. So, for example, if you are typing an email within Google's Gmail interface, and while you're typing, you get that autocomplete option that seems to almost type out the sentence that you've typed out. That's happening because of AI, because AI has been trained on hundreds of millions of emails to say probabilistically what is likely that this user will want to type after they have typed out the sentence that's already been typed out. Now, agentic AI is fundamentally this technology being deployed in order to carry out actions and tasks. So over the last 2 to 3 years, ever since the launch of ChatGPT, we've seen some remarkable progress in a particular kind of AI technology known as large language models. And what large language models do is probabilistically determine on the basis of their training data, literally speaking, what token should follow after this token. So everything from if you were to ask an AI model, is the moon round? It's saying, yes, the moon is round, to asking it to perform simple math, such as, is 2 plus 2 4, or what is 2 plus 2, to write a summary of an email for me, summarizing this 1,000-page doc into 100 words. Each of those actions are happening on the basis of these probabilistic models. And agentic AI gives the ability for these models to perform actions on behalf of a user. The most common and simple example that we've actually seen players such as Google, Microsoft, as well as OpenAI and Anthropic already deploy are agentic browsers, which are browsers where you can give a task such as go to Amazon, look for the best selling table for my bedroom and purchase it. And what you will see these agentic browsers do, which are often on their top tier plans within the subscription plans of these browsers because they're quite expensive to run, is you will see it open Amazon.com, type type in the product that you've described, go through the individual listings on that product, and then perform that purchase. Usually, at the point of performing the purchase, it will ask you for information such as credit card information, or if it already has it, to confirm, I'm going to buy this table, it's going to cost this much, and it'll take this much time to get delivered. Are you sure you want to continue? Then you press enter, and it completes that entire loop. That's a very simple example, but agentic AI is also being used to perform some very complicated tasks, including in AI assisted coding tools such as Claude Code, where it is used to, especially in the last, I would say, maybe 3 to 4 months, create entire new programs and repositories by multiple parallel tasks taking place at the same time.
Okay, thank you for those definitions. That's really helpful, especially with the examples. Um, AI models learn from our behaviors and our actions, right? As you've talked about, what kinds of personal data does agentic AI need in order to function? What types of our data is being ingested for it to act on our behalf?
I would say that there are 2 points at which personal data is usually ingested in these systems. The first point is at the point of training these models. Very similar to the example I gave earlier on Gmail's autocomplete, agentic AI systems also need to be trained on the actions that human beings usually carry out when they perform the actions that the user is asking. So, for example, the reason a large language model knows that when someone says buy something on Amazon, you have to go to Amazon.com is because it has been shown and taught that is what users do when they want to purchase something on Amazon.com. And usually, this training takes place in pseudo anonymized fashion. So, for example, it's not really the case that Google or Amazon is recording every single action you are undertaking under your browser, but much more the case that they often conduct training sessions where they actually hire members of the public or contractors or staff members to actually carry out actions and then record those actions and tell an LLM, this is how you carry it out. But there have increasingly been instances where we are seeing these AI systems being trained not just at this learning stage when the models themselves are being developed, but also on the data that users are actually submitting when they perform these tasks. So if you were to say, get the Perplexity browser and carry out an action, if you see the terms and conditions, you see that they do say that while they will remove personal data, so for example, that they won't remember your credit card number when you're typing it in to the AI system, that they are going to monitor your actions in order to further improve and iterate upon their systems. So agentic AI systems are trained on all of the actions that you usually carry out within that agentic system. Sometimes it can be quite innocuous, such as just a question, but it can also be some of the most intimate and private data that you have. For example, imagine I tell an AI system, go to my banking website, summarize my accounts for the last 2 years, and tell me what are the categories in which I have spent my money. And when I say that, all of the information that the AI system has to access is actually not just limited to my query, but also all the iterative actions it has to carry out when it is attempting to figure out how to do this. So, for example, it's not very obvious to an agentic AI system, my bank account information is available under account, overview, statement, detail statement, and download. It might have to end up going and opening every tab that is there inside your banking website in order to collect that information as well, because that's how it learns, iteratively and probabilistically after going through many cycles. So the risks for agentic AI actually largely exist because of the fact that in order to perform their actions, you almost need to give it the vast majority of your personal data and trust that it will carry out those actions in the most not just efficient but privacy preserving way as possible. And as I'm sure we'll talk about very briefly, that's not always the case, and we've seen some things go horrifically wrong when this happens too.
Are there any examples that you want to talk about there?
Absolutely. The one of the biggest examples that we've actually seen over the last 4 to 5 months is the way in which AI has been deployed in order to carry out actions on people's device using coding tools. So there have been documented instances where Claude Code has actually wiped a user's entire home directory because the commands that the user gave it in order to carry out the action, it hallucinated one wrong dash R or dash A at the end of a bash command that it was going to execute within the device. And what that meant was that the user had probably asked it to, take files from folder X, move them to folder Y, and then delete all the files from the original location. But what this agentic system ended up doing was removing all of the information from the device in the first place, right? Which is an example of data loss.
Okay.
We've also seen consumer facing use cases of this as well, because while this is not a full-fledged agentic AI system yet, Microsoft had actually deployed a feature called Microsoft Recall earlier in 2025 on devices. And what Microsoft Recall does is it takes a screenshot of your screen every 3 to 5 seconds, stores it on your computer, not on the cloud, and then runs an AI model on it in order to answer questions like, when was I looking at a yellow car on Amazon 3 months ago? And then magically that screenshot would turn up and it would tell you were looking at it on this day and here is the URL. But as you can imagine, what this was also doing was creating a honeypot of the interactions that a user is carrying out on their machine every 3 to 5 seconds and storing it on the computer and device as well. So sometimes we see risks that are the actions going wrong because, as we know, models hallucinate and make mistakes and sometimes carry out actions they're not supposed to. And sometimes it is about the basis of data collection itself that creates privacy risks.
So, what rights or protections do we have as users of agentic AI then?
That's a really, really interesting question, right? Because when it comes to artificial intelligence systems, you can understand quite often that software is provided without liability. Which is software is made available, especially when it is software that is free, where consumer protection law only goes so far when it comes to protecting you against what these agentic systems do. And almost all model providers, you'll see at the bottom, right where you're supposed to type in the prompt, say, this model makes mistakes. Please be careful about what you type in, as well as the actions that it carries out. So they're actually also informing you. But that doesn't mean that all of this is happening in a lawless wild, wild west, right? It's very, very clear that privacy law continues to apply, something that in the United States, many states have very good and strong privacy legislation, and globally, many countries have federal and state level privacy legislation that can give you the same rights that you get with regard to any other piece of technology, such as knowing where your data is going, objecting to certain processing of the data, and if something goes wrong, remediation in the form of complaints to data protection regulators. And we've already seen many of these complaints have actually been launched all over the world after some of these things have gone wrong with these AI models as well. So, one is just privacy legislation, but there's also artificial intelligence legislation that is slowly being passed in many countries around the world as well, which gives users rights, especially in high risk systems. So, say an AI model that is determining which post comes first or which posts come second, which, for example, Grok is the model that X.com uses to determine what should happen in its newsfeed. So it's not like these LLM systems are not being used to that. Is considered of a different kind of a risk from a model that is telling you whether you have diabetes or not in the same probabilistic way, because one is a sensitive health based use case. So there are many rights, but the truth is the contestation of the way that these programs are being implemented and the way that governments are enforcing these rights on behalf of their users is still very, very nascent, and it really
Mm-hmm.
does need to play out.
Yep, it's really early days. So then what practical steps can the audience today take away to be a bit more privacy aware, especially as AI evolves and it becomes more common in our everyday lives?
Yeah. It's actually a question we ask ourselves quite a lot at Signal, right? So now the reason we have such thoughts about agentic AI is, as you can imagine, as Signal, people have expectations of trust. When you send me a message on Signal, your hope is that Signal will do everything in its power to protect that message, which is why earlier last year, we actually updated the Signal app to prevent you from taking screenshots within Windows 11 on the Signal app. And the reason we did that was to protect ourselves against Microsoft recall, because what was happening was that in that screenshot, that was being saved on the user's device every 3 to 5 seconds. It today, if you try taking that screenshot, it is like you'll see that it'll be a blank screen because we use DRM protections in order to the same thing that Netflix uses to prevent you from recording a video when you're watching it on your personal device. We are having to use that to protect Signal and Signal messages as well. And the reason I use that as an example is it's, I think, very vital for consumers to be quite careful about the ways in which what data they give to these systems, the tasks that they let these systems perform, and ultimately ensuring that the risk that they undertake in performing the task doesn't go outside the boundaries that they are personally comfortable understanding. Because it's so enticing to have these very powerful systems that can do so many automated tasks that it can become pretty easy for us to go, it's okay, it can have all my credit card expense reports, or it can have all of my bank account information because it's making my life easier. Because until the laws are enforced better, and until these technologies are deployed in a more safer way, which is happening in the industry, it becomes pretty clear that users have a much higher burden of protection and proof that they need to meet in order to protect their privacy. And that's what I think users should do at the end of the day.
So we had one question come, actually a two-part question come in, but I think we might only have time, and I'm going to give you the easy one first. I think if we have time for the second one, we'll see. In your view, what is the most common misunderstanding when leaders have when they say our data is encrypted, so we're safe?
I mean, I would definitely say yes, it is safe, but that doesn't mean that it can't be reached because encryption is just one part of the series of measures that users and companies and organizations should carry out in order to protect the privacy of the subjects or to which that data belongs. Encryption will help you, but until we reach the magical world of
Right.
homomorphic encryption, which is when we'll be able to carry out operations on unencrypted data, all data will have to be decrypted ultimately for it to be useful. Just for example, it's encrypted when you send it to me on Signal, but then it gets decrypted on my device because I have to read
Mhm.
the message or no one will be able to send it. So I think encryption is just a part of the problem, and there are a range of measures, some in cybersecurity and some in consumer liability, that should be implemented to protect privacy.
So I'm going to ask his next question in a more general way. How does Signal balance usability versus privacy?
Absolutely. I think that the biggest way in which we do so is so many people and organizations have told us, let's find a way to make Signal also work for larger organizations, right? Like, why don't you make Signal a little more like Slack? Why can't I have channels? Why can't I have discovery features? And the reality is that we work very hard to make sure that we remain a pure messaging app and don't become a social media platform or a social media service. We don't have discovery. You can't search for people's, unless if you have the full username or the full phone number, you can reach out to them, but you can't reach out to people on the basis of personal information. You can't search for groups. You can't search for channels. A lot of the things that many of our competitors have, we've decided not to implement because we don't think it would be responsible to do so while maintaining privacy and security.
Great. Thank you very much. We have some other questions, but maybe if you want to hang around till the very end and backstage and then, or with your camera off, and then after the panel, maybe there'll be a chance for you to participate in the Q&A again. So thank you, Idhav. This was really great. I'd now like to welcome our panelists for our next session here. Rodolfo Eckhart, software engineer at OpenAI. Arjun Bhatnagar, I hope I don't Arjun, I've known you for over a year, and I'm still, I
All
mean, a
good.
woman named Flagemeyer knows what it's like to have a difficult name. Arjun is the founder of Cloaked, and Dana Simberkoff, Chief Risk, Privacy, and Information Security Officer at AvePoint, if I'm saying that right, I hope. If I can have you guys all turn on your cameras. Yep, there you are. Great, thank you. Now, next session, talking to AI. Where does your data go? A lot of us wonder this. Um, let's jump right into the questions. Um, okay, everybody. AI is becoming a part of our everyday lives, clearly, both in the workplace and our personal lives. And while these platforms can boost productivity, it's important to be aware of the privacy implications. That's why we're here this week. What unique privacy considerations come into play when using AI in the workforce? And then we're going to talk. I'd kind of like to go around and hear what you have to say about that. And then we'll talk about AI privacy considerations when we're using it in our personal lives. So let's talk about the workplace first. I know we have some data that shows that not a lot of people are being trained. Our O Behavior report shows that there's still not a lot of training happening in the workplace about the safe use of AI. Um, Dana, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, thank you so much. It's great to be with everybody for this really important conversation today. Um, so AI in the workplace, I think, brings up several different questions for us as employers and employees and people in general. So as an employer that uses AI in our workplace, one of the things that we have to be aware of are the models that we're using, where they're coming from, whether this is technology that we're licensing, using for free, or building ourselves. We have to understand the terms and conditions of the technology that we're implementing, and then its implications for our employees and for our customers as well. So as an employer, we have a responsibility to understand and to be transparent about what we're using. As employees, we also need to understand what the company's policies may be around the types of data and information that we can share with the AI. Again, it's sort of the difference between me, you, and we, right? What information is about me, what information is about us, and what information is about them, and what are the rules and policies that govern what I can and can't do. One of the things that I think companies and employees need to pay particularly close attention to are the use of those agentic AI tools or avatars to speak on behalf of employees in a company. So this is something that we see as a trend as well, where the likeness of an employee is being used, for example, to provide training to other employees. And this is something that AI is really great at doing, because you can take my image and my voice, learn what I sound like, and then speak on my behalf. So we want to be sure that when we're doing those kinds of things, that we are appropriately obtaining consent, that we have the right to do so, and that our employees understand what those rights are that they're giving up or giving away. Because again, the rights of an employee in a workplace may be very different than the rights of a consumer against a company that they're purchasing from. So there are a lot of implications. And I think ultimately for customers that may be purchasing services from companies that are using AI, it's really important to inform ourselves. So there is an absolute responsibility of companies and brands to make sure that they're transparent in the technology you're using and providing information to consumers about it. But equally, I think consumers need to be educated about the information that they're sharing and how they're sharing it. And so reading those privacy policies really does become important.
So we really should read those. Does anybody else want to comment on the workplace use?
I can keep it brief. I said so. As a consumer privacy company, we're also thinking about AI in our own enterprise use case, and I think just the way to think about it is enterprise, personal. The main thing to think about is that how are you setting up a framework for yourself in terms of relationship you want to have with AI? And I think that's something we talk about internally. We recognize that AI can gather, collect, harvest, use data, so we are paying for privacy enhancing features, settings that make sure that enterprise models aren't training on us. But the reality is that we're making sure that we understand what is being shared in a sensitive context, non-sensitive context. And I think the reality is that it's not really different between enterprise personal. You're just starting to be aware about what is being shared overall. And I think that's just the main thing to take away, is that it's the same thing you've been doing for the last 2 decades. Be careful of what you're sharing.
Okay, so then what about personal use? How is that different? What do people need to be thinking of? I mean, I've talked to people who've, put their whole health history in there and asked AI, what am I most likely to die from, and what should I do about it in the meantime? So we see a lot of interesting personal use cases. What do we need to be thinking about?
I don't know who wants to kick us off. Dana, so you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's a little bit of buyer beware. And so I think when we think, as you just said, Arun, about how we're using technology, we always want to consider the source. So in the same way that I wouldn't hand my credit card to a person standing on a street corner in New York City selling me watches out of the back of his van, I'm going to be very careful about sensitive information that I share with the technology that I don't fully understand. And I think for most consumers, AI is in that category of technology that we may not really understand. And unless you have a very clear understanding of who is going to access the data, what it's going to be used for, how long it will be retained for, who it will be shared with, then you don't understand where your data is going. So it isn't a one-to-one transaction when you're inputting technology or inputting your data into an AI solution. That data may be used downstream for many, many purposes. It could be shared and used for a purpose that you didn't intend. And that's really, I think, the risk to consumers potentially with sharing sensitive data with AI, that you have to understand who you're interacting with, make sure that this is a trusted partner and somebody that, again, you feel comfortable and confident providing that data to.
And I'd love to jump next, but I'd love Rodolfo if you could jump in, share.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Rodolfo to comment.
Thank you. No, I was just going to say, yes, I think that's one main difference between the personal and the workspace. While the personal use case, usually the risk is mostly individual. In a workspace, you have more systemic cases that are more problematic, and you have to. I think this is the key point that frameworks and decisions in the workspace have to be different than the personal use case, because you have to consider these cases, right? So, for example, while in the personal case, you might say, hey, for this particular tool, I don't trust with financial data. That's not enough on the enterprise level, right? On the other hand, at OpenAI, we are very aware that users might not have all the time to research and figure out who they're interacting with, right? This isn't a new problem. I would assume that most users have interacted with payment systems and they are unaware who's handling their credit card information once they fill out a form and press submit, right? So that problem isn't new, and our team is looking at not only that problem, but the new ones that AI represents. So yes, I agree with what everyone has said so far, of being aware of the tool that you're interacting with, the partners and the systems that you're interacting with, but also make sure that you understand what controls you have.
Arjun, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so as big into consumer security and privacy, this has always been the big topic around AI safety. And enterprise risk is really the big thing. We start off there, but personal understanding of the relationship and how using AI is important. We have known, for example, ChatGPT and OpenAI hallucinating, even leading people to commit suicide, right? There are serious implications of personal context. And context, I think, is the big thing we think about when you use AI in a personal use case. Cloaked, our company began because of an AI experiment I did in 2019, 2020, and I realized the extent of where AI is headed and realized, well, we're on a mission to figure out how do we introduce security, privacy in a way where potentially legislation and companies wouldn't be there, especially big tech. And I think when you're using personal AI technologies, you have to begin with that idea of context. What are you sharing? Who are you sharing with? And when you're using especially big, large models, it comes down to you should be sharing as if you're talking to somebody else. You're talking to a human, you're sharing things, and what you can be shared can be remembered and drawn back to you. And the thing when Lisa began with healthcare data, for example, if you dump everything about healthcare data, the challenge is you might actually share too much and could lead to wrong information. So the thing around what you share, when you share, and how you share is the way you should be thinking about it. And the easiest way to look at it is as if you're talking to somebody else.
Okay, so let's pivot for a minute and talk specifically about chatbots. I can't think of any of us who haven't interacted with them in some way, shape, or form. They've been around for a while, but now they're AI chatbots. So, what kinds of data are typically being collected, and who has access to that?
So I'll just jump in. I think it depends on, again, on the context, and that's really important. So for example, at AvePoint, we deploy chatbots that are used for our customers to help them with productivity in our products. So we provide customer-facing chatbots in our products that give suggestions to our customers about how to better use tools or find what they're looking for. Those are really just designed to take information that other customers have looked for and say, well, if you're looking for this kind of information, it's probably more likely here. So it's the idea of, that if one person has a question, 100 people probably have the same question and just haven't asked it yet. That's a pretty simple use case. But internally, these chatbots can also be used to go across multiple vast resources of information. So they can be used for things like, tell me about my HR rights, or tell me about when I have vacation coming up, or tell me about, upcoming holidays. They can really be used to do many different things. And so again, I think the context is always really important for people to understand when they're using them. The chatbots themselves should have terms of service. And one of the things that I think is really important to mention, because I don't think we've said it yet, is that many companies, while there's all kinds of regulation and legislation coming out around the world for AI technologies, many companies are also building on best practices and principles of building AI charters internally and externally that they share with their customers that talk about legitimate, rightful use of AI and principles of transparency, so that they build a foundation, a committee oversight, governance of these AI technologies, and then they provide very clear information about how it's being used, whether it's a chatbot or some other kind of technology. So Again, making sure you're reading those policies, using chatbots, that they have AI terms of service and that you're aware of them is really important.
Rodolfo?
Yeah. So at OpenAI, we place highest priority on privacy and protecting data because we understand from the question that we were answering before that people are having very sensitive conversations with models. And from one perspective, one could say that the data collected isn't unlike the data that you would see collected from other online systems, right? So you would expect content to be collected, but also metadata around it, right? But we want to be as transparent as possible, and we publish documents not only in our policy, but FAQ articles, help center articles explaining what types of data we collect and who has access to that data. But knowing that content is where the challenges hide, right? Because now with chatbots, users will be sharing different types of content that we might not envision at design time, at engineering time, right? So what we want to do is give as much control to the users as possible and be transparent about here is what data is collected, here is the controls you have, and here's what you have to do for the different use cases, right? So we offer different tools and different levels of privacy that you can use in the product as you engage with the bot, according to the sensitivity level that you have for a specific conversation, let's say. And we want to give that power to the user, right? Because if I try to set out a specific set of rules that map out every interaction that might exist, I will fail because I can't envision what people will be doing tomorrow with ChatGPT.
So we need to be reading policies, and we need to be reading what the organizations or the AI that we're choosing to use. We need to understand. We need to be reading that documentation too, right?
So definitely, I would definitely recommend knowing the tool that you're using and the features that are available, so you can adapt your stance according to the specific use case.
Arjun, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so this is something we deal with quite a bit, right? So at Clout, we are been dealing with hundreds of thousands of users that are asking the same question. Like, how do we think about chatbots? How do we think about our data? And I think, well, as Dana pointed out about reading about the policy documentation, as Rodolfo kind of mentioned, that you should be understanding the different ways models should be set up for you. I think the reality is I'm extremely deep in this space, and it's still very convoluted to set up all these things correctly.
It's hard.
So the reality is you have to start with some basic principles. Like, I have a couple of principles that I always start off with. The first is start with no. Say, don't give all the permissions. Turn off AI training. You should be saying, let me not give up everything about myself when I open up and make an account. Let's start with giving up the minimal amount of information to begin the engagement. And as I start using something more and more, I can share more data, share more permissions. But does that new AI app need access to all 20,000 photos you've taken in the last 10 years? The answer is no. Do they need access to your location all the time? No. And I think that's starting the easiest way is start with no. You'd be surprised if you go to TSA and when they ask for your license, you say, oh, I have to take a picture of the camera. If you just say no, you'd be surprised you can get through TSA just fine and there's no hindrance. And that's the way you should be thinking about this whole paradigm is start from no, start to share more, and then as you feel comfortable, you can share more information, but you should have a personal line in the sand because ultimately the business is not built to have a mission of keeping your data safe. That's what we do at Cloak. But the mission of these AI companies are to gather, collect, and provide the most customized experience for you at the expense of gathering everything they can. And I think that's where we really have to start shifting the dialogue. And that's the way we look at it.
It's a privacy convenience trade-off, right? I mean, the TSA example is a good example. If you're like me and you travel a lot and you want to go through that much shorter line that you just uses facial recognition and you feel comfortable with that and you think this is a trusted entity and they're not storing the information or you've done a little bit of homework on it, you're comfortable with it, then you might make that trade-off. But being informed about that, I think, is really important. Somebody asked a really good question in the chat, so I'm going to pivot to a few of those real quick. Do the AI mental health apps still follow HIPAA regulations? Anybody know off the top of their head?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Dana.
no, I was going to say certainly they should. I mean,
They
so
should, yeah.
when technology is used by a provider, the provider is responsible for making sure that any of the downstream services and technologies that they're using also comply. So we call that third party risk management. And so a healthcare provider would be responsible for making sure that if they were using AI chatbots or those kind of technologies, that they understood what they were using and that they were clear with those terms. But again, I think that's one of the challenges of the supply chain is that we're only as strong as our weakest link. And there is sort of like an inherent contradiction between privacy principles, which are focused on purpose limitation and data minimization, and AI, which really functions consuming as much data as possible and then learning from it. So the answer is they should, but you know, you got to be careful.
Yeah, you might want to ask the question of your provider. Right.
I'd say AI has been in use, for example, though, in healthcare for a while, maybe just not the way we're talking about it. Like you go back a decade in
Right. Machine
2014,
learning. Yeah.
yeah, there's in heart flow and heart medication, there's been AI for a while, just maybe not an AI chatbot. In terms of HIPAA data, it's only, I believe, in this last year with the first AI company that's kind of FDA cleared. But even then, I'd say ultimately that the AI chatbot experiences still haven't hit some of these thresholds. Regulation is in fast territory at the moment.
Anything you want to add to that, Rodolfo? Otherwise, I'm going to ask you the next question here.
No, feel free to jump to the next question. Yes.
So somebody's asking essentially about AI poisoning. How can we believe AI if the answers can be trained? Do we need to be concerned with who or how they're being trained? I mean, you do hear stories here and there of adversaries, but can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm happy to jump in for a moment. I think AI can be used like any other technology for good or for bad. And in my role, I'm also responsible for cybersecurity at a security company. So we certainly have seen the misuse and abuse of AI by adversaries to mimic people, to attack people, to influence people, to steal money, to do all kinds of harm in different contexts. So I think you do have to be concerned about this. But the technology itself is somewhat agnostic, right? There is not really good or good or bad technology. It's the good use or bad use of technology. So I like to think of AI as a cybersecurity person's best friend or worst enemy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Rodolfo, tell us a little bit about that from your perspective. What are you looking? Because obviously it's not to your advantage if you end up with AI that's poisoned. So how do you
Of course.
mitigate that?
Of course, and this is the value to the research, right? So our mission is to deliver the best AI model that we can to all humanities, and we can only do that with quality data. And during our evaluation of data that we use, of course, we're checking for these situations. I think the question was also tended towards evaluating who's training the data and what biases they might have or might have added to the training process. And for sure, I think this is something that everyone has to be aware and paying attention and not trust blindly. We are very clear that AI models can make mistakes, so I wouldn't say trust every single answer that AI would give you.
I just add though, to answer the question, Lisa, there are models being developed like EXA, which is touting they're the world's biggest index on humans, right? And so the idea that that's just one, there's going to be 100 more and things you never even heard of, models being built behind the scenes. And so to think that there are people building, indexing, harvesting things about people, and that's not happening would be silly. What we're seeing even in the enterprise security land is that we call the human layer the ID. We always talk about cloud, endpoints, devices, what people always attack. The next layer of attack is actually the human level, where we're now AI, as of last year, has gotten better than actual humans at compromising other humans. They've actually figured out how to target, imitate, and pressure people at all the right moments. And I think that's where you should be wary because it is happening and it's thinking about what does human defense look like at your organization.
Dana, I have a really practical question for you from the audience. Can you be held liable? Is there any kind of liability involved if you turn on AI during a meeting and you're gathering people's voice, face, name, information like that? Or are there protections there? Or just, I mean, almost every tool that I can think of, there's always something to say to tell the participants that that feature's turned on. Is that all we need?
I think we want to be careful about not giving legal advice because
right.
It's a really big, it depends also here.
Yeah.
But again, I think within a corporate environment, there definitely would be policies that your company would have about recording people and requiring consent. There are different laws in different parts of the world about two-party consent for conversations and different types of permissions you need. But in general, I think the best practice is that you shouldn't take something without asking for it. It's very similar to what we learn on a playground when we're children, right? You ask nicely and then you only take something when it's offered to you. So asking somebody for their permission to record them is always the best practice, whether it's required or not. Liability is a different question. It's a legal question. And I think that, you do have to be very careful about recording anybody without their permission and consent.
Yep. Somebody has asked a question about AI avatars interviewing candidates for jobs. Somebody just did their first one. What are the implications of that? And then we'll go back to our regularly scheduled questions.
Rodolfo, want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think I was going to say I think there are two different aspects or perspectives to look at the question. One is from the corporate side, right? Well, I would even say three different perspectives. Now that I think about it, one is the enterprise side, right? Like you're the enterprise using one of these tools, so like what happens to that data, like what controls do you have around it and so on. There's a societal level, right, from the labor market perspective. I think that's a whole different dynamic that we can discuss, right? But even now from the model trainer, from the research side, this is where I would be more interested. This is although OpenAI, we don't have a system like that you can conduct. I would imagine that people are using ChatGPT to produce resumes, review resumes, or take notes, or use ChatGPT in interview processes. So the privacy engineering, the team that I lead, we know that we will have sensitive data there, and we do our best to make sure that all of the data is de-identified. We will not use this data for training, and we make sure that that data is only used for the intended purposes of the user.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
I think this comes back to the same point that AI is here, and if we haven't actually done any AI type interviews at Cloaked, but we've actually had AIs try to apply for jobs at Cloaked and had fake job applications. And I think the reality is that knowing that this is out there, what are you doing in terms of understanding if something is AI? What are you sharing with AI? And if you understand it's AI, what are you doing to mitigate its implications or risks on your business? If you're an individual interviewing with an AI avatar, I will just say AI can instantly look up everything about you. So it'd be best in your best interest to not give up your piece of data that they can find anywhere, phone number or email, that they can look you up, find everything about you, compile, and have a bias towards you. Try to be able to give minimal information and let it learn about you and what you want it to know about you.
Let's go back to my original example of sharing sensitive personal data like health information or maybe financial information with an AI tool. Can you talk a little bit in more detail about what actually happens to that data? How does that get used, and what are the risks there for the individual? Rodolfo, do you want to start that one?
Rodolfo should kick us off,
Yeah,
and then
so
we
definitely.
should
So definitely,
validate.
I can give a perspective from both a consumer and an enterprise view, right? So from a consumer perspective, it's important to know that all the information that you give is used only on the product side, right? So the answers that you give are given to the model at inference time, we would say at production time, at runtime, right, to give you the best answers, and that information is kept only for that purpose, right? Only for your conversations, right? For your context, and we give users control over whether that data can be used for training or not, right? Whether your conversations can be used for training, but we also don't want to teach. We don't want to train a model about a specific person or specific individual. We want to train a model to understand about the world, and having that individual with that sensitive data actually hinders the training process. So even for the users that haven't selected not to opt out of training, for example, we wouldn't use sensitive data. Right? What do you mean by sensitive? Like, what do we mean by sensitive data? It goes beyond only detecting things that we would clearly detect as sensitive, right? So things like credit card information, social security number, things that are obviously sensitive. We use intelligent models that we train to detect sensitivity based on the context of the conversation, right? So in individual pieces of data that by themselves wouldn't be enough to be considered sensitive, we might remove because in that context they are. Right, in that particular conversation, they are. So again, I think it's important to differentiate what data is used on the production side, on ChatGPT, and things like, what can you remember about my previous conversations? That is really the model once it's been trained, once it's in production, looking at the data that is stored about that particular user, and then on the training side, on the model improvement side, we have a very strict, filtered, aggregated, de-identified data set that we use for training.
So Rodolfo gave a lot of really good nuggets there. So I actually wanted to jump in
He did.
where it's really good to hear, especially right talking about OpenAI, but now OpenAI doesn't represent all AI models and all AI companies, right? So one thing is that OpenAI might do a really good job at de-identifying data, but as we learned, I believe it's Samsung and some other companies where they noticed their IP coming out in model results, that it's not always a perfect science depending on which AI company. And there's some AI companies that are doing the opposite, what Rodolfo was saying, which is that actively training on these data points. And I think that's where, and you don't know, and because a lot of these term service and privacy policies are all biasing towards you choosing, and those settings are complicated by design because privacy is meant to seem complicated because companies don't want you to have it. And that's really the hard part about this whole space we're in. And Rodolfo really gave another interesting point. If OpenAI is not training and trying to be de-identifying you, we should really think about, especially when we're talking about avatars and relationships with AI, people often mistake and feel like the AI is building a relationship with that individual. But as we heard from Rodolfo, it's not. And there's a really good way of looking at this. And I'd suggest people Googling this after fact. There's a great individual, John Searle, in 1980, talked about the Chinese room thought experiment. I definitely suggest Googling it, but it shows this concept and talks about how your idea of artificial intelligence, it's in a as Udbah said really well, it's predicting, it's logically jumping, or if you say it even in a crude way, it's pattern matching at the crudest sense. It's not building an understanding of you, no matter how real it seems. So you want to be careful on what that relationship looks like with AI. So if you're sharing sensitive data, it's not becoming your long-term friend or your long-term partner. It is predicting, it's finding, trying to give you some sort of answer, but it's not really learning who you are. So that's the cautionary tale around relationship with AI and sensitive data, because if you think it's learning you, it's not. It's just building the next logical jump from one token to the next.
Okay, before we wrap up, we're going to do a speed round on your best piece of advice, like a best practice for the average consumer. Who wants to start? Arjun, how about you?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So when you think about consumer, I kind of said this earlier. I have three pieces of advice I always jump to. It said start with no. That's always the big thing to do. Don't share right away. Share gradually. Absolutely don't share sensitive information. And when you have shared sensitive information, the third one, what do you do? Well, you can what's called poison the well. In AI systems, you can overflood with context so it doesn't remember, understand who you are, or you can start to change information that's out there to confuse what systems learn about you. So privacy shouldn't feel like a lost cause or it's impossible. I've proven it. Systems think I live in Mississippi, and I've never been to that state. OpenAI thinks I'm a nurse, and I've never ever done anything such. So there's ways to really approach the problem. I will say one closing thought from Cloaked, because our mission is really thinking about AI safety, security, privacy. The one thing to note is that federal legislation is all about now not regulating AI or AI companies. So we are putting the burden on us as people. So legislation that starts to talk about how we protect ourselves, and we've been really going to the Hill and talking about this idea that how do us as individuals protect our sense of privacy, our security? This is paramount. I'm excited that there's actually legislation now by Congresswoman Trahan that's called the My Data Act that we're really supporting, that we should really think about how we protect ourselves when AI companies have no rules, regulations to do so. So that's something that I want to really shout out and let people know.
Dana, how about you? What would you want to leave people with?
Sure. Well, I think a really important takeaway, and I saw this in one of the questions, was this idea that privacy is complicated and that people become a little bit privacy fatigued because we've talked about reading privacy policies and doing things that seem really hard. But I think the number one takeaway that I would have for everybody is that privacy really matters. It is a fundamental right. It's something that we all have a responsibility to prioritize in our lives. And I think it's an opportunity for us to shape the world that we want to live in. So while there is a little bit of work involved in reading and understanding where you're sharing data and who you're sharing it with, I think it's work well worth doing. And we do have that opportunity to help influence companies and what they do with our data and how they use it, and to shape the future of the world that we want to be living in. So I would say make privacy your priority. And that's probably the one big thing I would think about this entire week and every day.
Rodolfo, last word?
Yes, I just want to echo both comments from Arjun and from Dana. I like I definitely advocate don't for taking privacy seriously. Don't think that it's something that it's gone. That you can you keep it in mind, learn about your tools, learn about what's going on, but also make your voice heard. As I said, the privacy engineering team, and we're definitely interested in hearing what the folks and what the users are saying. So we definitely want to hear from users who have feedback on the privacy stance and our products. And I'm really happy to hear that ChatGPT has not memorized Arjun's perfection.
Great to hear.
Thank you very much, everybody. I want to thank all the panelists and speakers today, and I want to thank all of you who took time out of your day. There's a ton of questions here that we didn't get to. So I think that we need to deliver more content on this topic and do more webinars. Maybe some that are, maybe we'll do one in the future that's just open Q&A with some experts for the whole time, because I think a lot of us have a lot of questions and we're trying to figure this out. But thank you very much for giving us your time and attention today. I welcome you to visit us on StaySafeOnline.org or follow us on social media. If you want to know about future webinars, just go to StaySafeOnline.org and sign up for our newsletter. And every time we're doing a webinar, then you'll see it in an email. Thank you very much. Thanks again, speakers. Have a great day, everybody, and a good data privacy week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.